Kein Schwert, verhiess mir der Vater. My father didn't promise me a sword. Readings from the Autobiography of American Heldentenor Jess Thomas. What would my life be like without Richard Wagner? What has led me and thousands of other singers to devote so much time and thought to the performances of Richard Wagner's music? I must of necessity find some justification for having spent over 30 years of my life addressing myself to his works. How can one, at the end of a career, possibly explain to others the reasons one has found a life's purpose and meaning in the compositions and performances of one so controversial and many times misunderstood? I surely am but one individual in the long line of people who have been influenced by Richard Wagner. I am also in good company. I don't pretend to be an authority on the subject, but I surely am not alone in my admiration. The world of music, literature, and theater, from kings to composers, authors, poets, and men in every walk of life have idolized him and been influenced by him. Even his great enemy, Hanslick, a critic who he so unmercifully characterized in Die Meistersinger, was to write in his autobiography, he exercised an incomprehensible magic in order to make friends and to retain them. Friends who sacrificed themselves for him and, 3 times offended, came 3 times back to him again. The more ingratitude they received from Wagner, the more zealously they thought it their duty to work for him. The hypnotic power that he everywhere exerted, not merely by his music but by his personality, overbearing all opposition and bending everyone to his will, is enough to stamp him as one of the most remarkable phenomena, a marvel of energy and endowment. How is it that Richard Wagner is such a challenge for an artist, and what especially led me to seek fulfillment in a life devoted to his works? Wagner provided an approach to performing which uncapped my psyche and laid bare a source of expression that I have never experienced elsewhere. He spoke to me as no other composer or, for that matter, any other creative genius ever did. So much has been written about Richard Wagner that I shouldn't like to pretend to offer a scholarly explanation of why his music had such an effect on me that would add to the already vast volumes of learned commentary. What I do want to do is describe the experience of being a Wagner singer. What does one actually experience in the singing of Wagner? Wagner knew that he was gradually forming the orchestra into an unerring, unmistakable expression of instinctive primal feeling, fully in tune with the psyche, which would nudge the individual artist into his own conscious awareness of his unconscious and free him to express more than he could or even would otherwise. This very freedom, which some artists feel in performing Wagner, is in some way a high, an euphoric stage, not unlike some drug or chemically induced highs. Only in this case, The drug is Wagner's music, and the effect is also experienced by the listeners. Wagner knew just how much influence he would like to have over the performers of his works. He was not often to enjoy complete satisfaction with the performances of his operas, and often came to regret his own ideas of casting certain artists. Naturally, he came to wonder if he had been at all clever by entrusting so many long, complicated roles to the tenor voice. This doubt would, no doubt, be echoed by many an opera director or manager still today. On the one hand, Wagner was leaving less responsibility in the hands or voice and acting ability of the singer by minutely prescribing the emotional climate of the situation in the orchestra. And on the other hand, he was providing a continuous carpet of sound which provoked the individual artist to match vocal and histrionic reaction to the enriched sensual color of the music with appropriate inner reactions. And here we come to the point of Richard Wagner's demands on the singer, which far outreached the demands ever before made on one as a performer. He challenged the singer to maintain the continual intensity of voice and action, which he was almost obligated to feel by the onslaught of the orchestral stimuli. There were rubber hands of this intensity which stretched from the initial chord of the opera until the climactic ending. In some cases, this intensity is an almost tangible force felt even by the audience. What does the Wagner or any other singer do to maintain this intensity, this continuity in his performance? First, I think he starts by feeling the power of the boosting orchestra. It is certainly an ego trip to stand on a stage and feel the surge of the orchestra and imagine the voice as the focal point of this virtual force field. One often speaks of the experience of riding the orchestra. Let me tell you, it is a real sensation. One is in control of this feeling as long as one remains in control of his vocal, mental, and physical faculties. But it is tempting to let go and ride with the waves of sound and emotion instead of being in control of the process. The singer must follow the dictates of Wagner and be able to retreat, distance oneself enough to be, as he suggested, a bodiless spirit capable of enjoying the godlike freedom of expression, and yet hold a tight rein on the technical demands being made at the same time. If you have sat in the audience and thrilled to the spectacular moments of Wagner, can you imagine how an Isolde feels when she meets the Act 1 challenge and launches into the initial monologue, Nimmermehr, nicht heut, noch morgen? I have stood backstage and literally been lifted off my feet by the soaring of the human voice with the orchestra, and the same happens often in Wagner. Think of Ortrud when she matches the rushing orchestra in her Entweihte Goethe, or a Hagen when he, in the third scene of Act 2 of Götterdämmerung, sounds his Stierhorn and calls his men with a blood-curdling "Hoi ho!" Or a Sieglinde who matches the ecstasy of the meltingly beautiful phrase at the end of Act 2 in Walküre. O heerstes Wunder, a Brunhilde with her triumphant, joyous Hoyo-Toho entrance in Walküre, or a Siegfried at the anvil successfully testing his Notung with So schneidet Siegfrieds Schwert, or a Wotan surrounded by fire, majestically singing his farewell to Brunhilde. All heady stuff and capable of giving the singer the feeling of being a god, or at least a bigger-than-life figure. It gives one an indescribable sense of power and satisfaction. It is an experience that summons all the senses at once. One is stretching the physical, mental, and vocal capabilities and laying them bare before an audience, and must be one of the most complete gratifications given to man. Of course, I can't neglect all the other divine composers who give, in their way, gratification to the singer. Certainly, the spirituality of a Bach, the almost divine revelations of a Mozart, the virile classic beauty of a Verdi, the surging cantilena of a Puccini, and hundreds of others bring total satisfaction in their own individual way. But Wagner, and many of those he influenced, paved the way to stretch, at least for me, the very limits of human expression.